Welcome to episode 29. Check out what we have in store for you this week.
Somebody should have prepared me for the crapshoot that is American taxes, okay?
Well,
that's all I'm saying.
I'm not sure anybody knows how to do it, so... I actually competed in a tournament that he had
with
previously competed in. No.
Okay, like he had done it once. You picked up on Will must be making a transition because why the crap did he just start talking about King Arthur and Excalibur? What is up, high-tech podcast listeners?
Whoop, whoop.
I'm assuming you're a high-tech podcast listener because you're listening to the high-tech podcast. If you're not normally, you're now listening to the high-tech podcast, so you count as a high-tech podcast listener. I claim you as a listener.
Is this like those people that call me like, oh, sorry, wrong number? Is that what just happened?
Like I don't know, but somebody just left right now. I can feel it. I can feel it.
That's
in
on
the
me.
Force.
That's on me.
They were basically like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. Oops. This is not a popular podcast like I thought it was. And goodbye. They left. Welcome, guys. Another week of the High Tech Podcast with myself, Josh Schwartz, and my co-host, the Illingworth, William Illingworth. That didn't work.
Keep trying.
I thought it
You've
was
been trying for 29 episodes.
I've been trying for a while.
Someday you'll get a
nickname.
Oh, yeah, it definitely goes before the podcast. Nicknames for me have always been hard found.
I feel like it should be easier than this. You know what? For those of you who do listen to the High Tech Podcast, okay? I'm asking for a favor, okay? Go to @HighTech Podcast on Twitter. Will, I want you to, when this episode releases, don't you forget. I want you to post, and I want people to give me a nickname for Will, okay?
Yep.
So, nickname for Will. I want a nickname for Will. Whatever it is will end up on one of our episodes. I don't care. Just drop it in there. Will's dropping in a task to remind himself so he doesn't forget to post this on Twitter when this episode releases. You can do it. You know why? Because we do this occasionally. Well, we ask people for things on Twitter.
Oh, gosh.
You know, like one time we asked for more suggestions for opening questions.
Yes, we did.
So that we knew what to do. And you know what? We got some.
I'm not
saying they were from my wife, but they might have been.
They weren't from my wife. They were definitely from a wife, though, which would not be mine.
They were from a wife of someone, and that person shall go unnamed at this point. So we got a bunch of questions from that singular person, and other people. Come on, send a question. If you listen to the episode, you got another opportunity. You can give Will a nickname.
If you send us
this is an important thing.
If you send us a question, you won't be a sponsor. Hey. Hashtag not a sponsor.
That's true.
This is great.
Hashtag not a sponsor. Hashtag high tech podcast. Hashtag not a sponsor.
Hashtag. So the
hashtag.
question
Anyway,
that was sent in.
Yes.
What obscure class do you wish existed? Now, Josh actually immediately said, "Oh, I think I've got something," and then left me in suspense. I actually don't know what he's about to say, so I am gonna hit my mic again as I usually do, and then I'm gonna ask Josh to answer first.
Okay, so I don't know if this would count as an obscure class, but it's a class I wish they would have taught. It's the running joke from all people who are like, why did I go to education, the school? And I don't necessarily agree with these people, but I do agree that we probably should have been taught how to do this, and I feel like we weren't. A taxes class.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's obscure because no one does it, and it shouldn't be obscure because, what the frick, people? I learned a lot of things in high school and college, and I use a lot of them. Those who say they don't use them are wrong. Okay, you use the problem-solving skills that you get from school. You use the history that you learn. You use all of that stuff. It builds you to be the person, and forms you to be the person you are. So I want to be very clear that I'm not supporting that group of people who act like if you didn't learn taxes in school, you didn't learn anything.
That sounded like the Steve Rogers film in Captain America or in Spider-Man where he's on the movie and he's like, and you too should also blah blah blah. You just gave the stereotypical advertisement for school. I love it. I loved it.
Yes. Anyway. Yeah, well, that's what I wanted. You know, I do buy some of this stuff, you know,
more than
but
me.
I also agree that what the crap? Nobody taught us how to do our taxes. That didn't come up as a class. That didn't apply to math class at any point.
Yep.
To say, here's the real world problem of doing your taxes.
Yep.
I get it. We don't want to talk about it.
Hey,
but
it definitely would have worked in algebra. Take this x variable from that column and this Y variable from that box, and
somebody should have prepared me for the crapshoot that is American taxes. Okay,
well,
that's all I'm saying.
I'm not sure anybody knows how to do it, so
Well, that might be the case, but we need someone. Okay, there's got to be a hero somewhere who knows how to do it. That can start a tax curriculum.
That's it. We need a hero
For students.
We need taxman in schools.
That's my obscure class that should have existed and does not. What's yours?
I agree with that one. I can't
take that though. That's mine.
Oh, ditto? No, not gonna work.
Can't ditto.
I definitely think that martial arts is just it for me. Like, I tried to think of something that wasn't that. Everybody's gonna expect that answer from me, I think, but. I love martial arts. They're so good, and I think that if every kid had to do them, a lot of kids would be better people.
Yeah.
It's just my...
Well, I mean, it could have fit in a gym class. I feel like that's the thing. Like, I'm sorry. I agree with you, okay? I'm going to defend you for a second, because here's the deal.
Thank you.
I learned ping pong in gym class. You know what is not gym-like?
Ping pong.
I didn't learn how to do martial arts in gym class, but I learned how to hit a ball on a table. Like, I love ping pong. Don't get me wrong.
Table
I just
tennis,
don't feel like
please.
whatever. Okay, but I just feel like I didn't need the number of weeks that I did on ping pong. Okay,
Yep.
I could have learned a kata, which seems to be the thing that we keep coming up with. And it doesn't even have to be entirely in person. It could have been through VoiceThread or another tool that we've talked about on this wonderful podcast. So, but either way, I'm gonna back you up here. I feel like that deserves some space in the gym class.
Chuck Norris actually does have a program that puts karate into some schools, so there are people out there trying to do it, and I appreciate that. But
yeah,
it's something that I think could be.
I want a real martial artist. No, I'm just joking.
Oh gosh! What you don't know is Josh just died in front of me because Chuck Norris roundhouse kicked him from Texas. I actually competed in a tournament that he had previously competed in. No. He had competed there in the 60s
like
or
he
something.
had done it once.
But in the pamphlet of the tournament, it had like all the previous year's champions, and I'm like reading up through like random name, like 60s, like Chuck Norris. I was like, what? Where? What?
What you just said is like the martial arts equivalent of going, I once sat in a bar seat that like Sting sat in, Like,
I mean, I think it'd be more like I used a guitar that Sting used. That would be a better metaphor.
Okay,
yeah,
that's true. Yeah, but my metaphor sounded more mean, so
that's
I
true.
Went with that
After defending me, you had to put me down. I totally get it. You needed to make sure.
I had to put you down. And let me be very honest. I was probably just being a jerk to Chuck Norris because I just watched some video of him fighting Bruce Lee, and I couldn't take the old Chuck Norris, the young Chuck Norris fighting Bruce Lee seriously. So I understand that's why he got famous. That's a different podcast that we'll talk about some other time, which is the High Chuck Norris podcast.
Now that we've spent such a wonderful amount of time on our opening conversation.
Oh yeah, we did.
Thanks, Josh's wife. Let's jump into our intellectual. No. I wanted to say our intellectual conversation, but that's high. That's a high esteem of ourselves. I'm not so sure that it's really there.
It's not going to go that direction, I don't think.
If you have listened to our first episode on VoiceThread, thank you. If you've listened to our first episode on VoiceThread and subsequently went and listened to our interview with Steve Muth, you are ready for today's episode. If you have not listened to either of those things, it might be helpful to go listen to them. That's a Josh plug that he usually makes. I made it today.
It is, and I'm desperately checking our release calendar to make sure that these line up.
Well, if our release calendar's against me, then spoiler alert, you're going to hear about this in the future. If this gets released after our interview with Steve Muth, well then, all the better.
Sorry, people breaking fourth wall just for a second. This episode will release exactly the week after we release the VoiceThread episode.
Yes! So, I got so lucky.
We nailed it. Go us.
Perfect.
Okay, anyway, to the point, though, that Will is trying to make before I made it more difficult, and this episode's going to be longer than normal, probably.
Perfect.
Perfect. Is in that episode, he makes a comment about designing technologies so that it's in the background, making it disappear, essentially, right?
Yep.
Is the concept that he talks about. I think he says making just technology disappear. And it inspired us to have a conversation about this topic. because I think both you and I have at some point, like, this has come up before. It's not, while the way he said it was kind of interesting to us, it's not a new concept that we have not wrestled with before. And I do think it has value to talk about when it comes to education, because I do think there's a couple, like, different groups of people. There's the people who fall into our category a little bit, who really like technology, and sometimes can get lost in the integration of technology.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And make things more complicated than it needs to be, simply because you want to use all the tools.
Hey, whoa. We aren't talking about anybody. No naming names.
I'm not naming names. I'm not naming you either, specifically. There's another group that probably falls in a little bit more in the medium zone of, like, finding this happy medium. There's another group that, like, just hates technology, and those group we don't talk about because they're not listening to our podcast right now. So, but how do we make technology disappear? I think is kind of how we wanted to talk about it. And spoiler alert, this is gonna be another two-parter because we seem to be getting into some bigger conversations now. We've wasted all of our small conversations, and we're getting into more detailed ones, so we need to do them in 2 episodes. So this one, I think we just kind of want to introduce this idea and talk a little bit about, like, what do we mean when we say how to make technology disappear? Like, what does that mean for education? How do we start?
I want to briefly do homage to Steve's point. Like, we were talking about this in the context of user experience and the platform, and he was talking about VoiceThread and some things like that. So to the point that Steve said, I think is probably most of our definition, but Josh and I are definitely going to riff off it a little bit differently. So to the simplest, if you want to make the technology disappear, I think your user experience, the app itself, the tool you're using, should be as simple as possible. Should be easy to use, intuitive, some very subjective things, but even objectively, if you have to click down 3 or 4 levels before you get to do something, that's probably already a barrier to learning. If you have 12 different color systems, so the app is gray and then the menu buttons are blue, and then the things you look at have an orange background with green highlight. Again, there's something to making it simple and straightforward, and that comes out of cognitive load theory in general. But I think that's what Steve was definitely trying to point at. Like, when we're making your product or trying to make your product better, simplify it. Get the most important features up first. Reduce colors, reduce fonts, reduce the click path so it's as easy to get to what needs to be done as possible. Would you take it further than that? Do you think that there's anything else in there from?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think that's where Steve's coming at it, because Steve obviously is coming at it, like, all these interview episodes we end up doing, he's like, there are people who develop tools, so they're a little bit in a different world than our average educator. They're developing tools for education, so they're not just thinking about how people are going to use this in their courses, but they think about how they make the process simple. And Steve's getting at a good point. Some people go way overboard with tools, way too many features, way too many things to do, way too many ways to get there. And they're inadvertently doing something we talk about in education all the time, which is not overloading people, they're overdoing the cognitive load of what can be handled. Now, the caveats I would add in there is that we won't get too deep into this because this is not a user experience podcast, so I don't want to get too far into that. But I think at its core, how I think about this is, and I go off of a book that I've read a handful of books on this topic, but there's a book that I'd recommend. It's called Don't Make Me Think. Fantastic book. I can't remember the author's name now off the top of my head, but trust me, if you Google Don't Make Me Think user experience, his book will come up right away, because it's one of the major ones. And maybe we can look it up here real quick before we're done talking about it. But it's a great book. And his point to what Steve's commenting on is what it's really about is it's not necessarily like you talk about, like, click paths, for instance. It's not necessarily about, like, just like reducing the amount of times people click or doing stuff like this. It's about building something that just makes sense. And that will fall into the background. So, like, the caveat is because we have a friend of ours and a colleague of mine who will argue that, like, nothing should be beyond 2 clicks to something. If you're building a course, no student should have to click more than twice. And I'll make the argument that if you make the page convoluted just so they don't click twice, it still doesn't make sense.
Right. They could click once and it can still be bad. Like, it's not necessarily just the click rate.
Don't make me think we'll get into these concepts of, like, sometimes you may make them click 4 times, but you may make them click 4 times because all 4 of those clicks make absolute sense to a person who's clicking through them, and they will do it if it makes sense. And so like, but that's the whole point, is like just making things make sense. And how this fits into education, because most of you either listening to this are probably trying to get tools for education, or you're in a teaching experience, or you're in what Will and I did do. I'm still in my job. I don't know why I'm acting like I'm not. Is
surprise,
like designing online courses and stuff like that. So you're not necessarily like building apps from scratch like Steve did. Right. But where this does apply is that all of you, whether you're a teacher or you're developing a course like we do, you're building online courses, you're in some way designing and creating a learning experience, and in of itself is a product of experience, just like an app is that you build. So when you're doing it, you also want to think about how this, I think, applies to us. And what we're talking about, how to bring technology into the background, is when you're picking tools, when you're kind of coming up with the process of how they're going to do an assignment or they're going to do an activity, you want them to think deeply about the content or the activity itself. You don't want them to have to worry about the process of doing it. And that's where this comes into it, is especially when it comes to ed tech and technology, do we select tools that are simple for students to use? Do we make sure the process is simple? The amount of times I've seen instructors go, okay, you're going to do this activity, but here are the 6 different tools you're going to do it. Like, what? Like, they're going to have to get around this. And we had this complaint, and while we're mainly a higher ed podcast, we've seen this in K-12. When they moved remote over COVID, the amount of parents that complained that they had like 15 tools that they had to remember for their students. Because this instructor would be like, well, in their mind, I'm going to use Flipgrid to do this, but then we're going to use this to do this, and then we're going to use this to do this. But then the students in different environments, it would be like if you were bringing them into your classroom to teach, but then the next day you were like, well, we're going to be in that house outside over here, and then in 2 hours we're going to be down there. But the worst part is, I'm not going to show you where to go. Like, this is.
I hope you get there. Good luck.
I hope you get there. Good luck. And so that's, to me, that's where this starts to connect with education, is how do we make the process, the design, the setup of what we do for our students as simple as possible so that they can focus on the actual learning.
Well, and I think that something that's important here from our perspective, trying to offer this out to you folks, is like, this is a quality to use not only when designing your learning experiences, like Josh said, but of course when picking. So if you have the choice between 2 comparable products to use with your students, and one is really difficult to use and one is really easy to use, even if the difficult to use one may have 1 or 2 features you really, really want, I would encourage you to go with the easier to use one, right? Because that's going to, over time, it's going to pay out in dividends. Like, if I have to take time to train the students on to do it consistently, or if there's going to consistently be issues because of the user experience, like, that's reducing my ability to teach. It's raising their stress level. It's demotivating them. I might have to get tech involved, so now we have a cost. Like, there's just so many layers to something when it's not easy to use. And so something that I really wanted to kind of come back around to is like even a bad example, or an example of a bad thing, right? One of the platforms I use right now, if I hit the menu button, my entire screen is taken over with 5 columns of menus organized by certain features. No alphabetized system, no numeric system, no linear system, there's no like advanced settings area separate from core settings from this setting. It's just a dump. Right? I click the settings button, and every time I click that settings button, I have to either use my browser to search for the setting I want, because I have no idea where it is on the page, or I have to manually read the page, right? And that's a feature that, if it was organized by something, if the features, it could even be all those features, but it had a built-in search function, if, right? There's tons of ways you could do that better. But that's now a product that, at least for my sake, I'm only using it on the administrative end. My students or my teachers would never see that kind of thing, right? That's something you want to watch for. If when your students go to use the experience, it jumps out at them and they kind of get stuck in like, what do I click first? Where do I go to do something? What's expected of me? If you can't answer those questions quickly when you use the tool, or when you create your curriculum, they can't either. And that's the stuff that to us is what it means to make technology disappear. Yes, there will always be first week or first use training. Making the technology disappear doesn't mean we don't train the students on it. It doesn't mean that we can find training free programs, right? But once they're trained, or once you've given some initial training, they should be able to consistently use it thereafter without intervention, right? Yeah. Maybe the first week, there's lots of different things you're doing to give them practice, train them on different features, show them things. That's fine. But if you're still training them in week 3 and in week 4, if an issue comes up in week 6, it's like, didn't I show you how to submit an assignment in week 1? That might speak to really bad training. That's possible. But it's probably a user experience breakdown. Like, they don't see the button to put that in. Josh and I were doing something tonight in Notion. I've been using Notion with him now for quite some time, and I still asked him, I was like, how the heck do I upload my profile picture? There wasn't like a spot somewhere I could see my profile and click on it. There wasn't an area that said account. Like, I had to click on a menu, open it up. I had to click on settings, open that up, and then I had to find the My Account feature. So even for me, a seasoned tech user, there's always something. But the more we can do, like, that's a great example of a lot of apps now. Just put your avatar or your profile picture in the top right hand or left hand side of the screen, right? And click on your picture if you need your account, if you need your preferences. That's a really consistent design experience that makes it easy for folks to know how to do that kind of functionality.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking Notion, it was obviously your fault.
It was 100% my fault. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. No.
Yeah. We love you, Notion. # not a sponsor.
Yeah, I think it comes out of those two areas, like picking the right tools that are going to be simple for your students. And let me emphasize something here, because I think when we get into this conversation about making technology disappear, okay, the interpretation from instructors and people teaching is, okay, I shouldn't have to worry about the technology. That's the piece. And that's not what I mean. I kind of sarcastically put it this way, because I'm a mean person sometimes, is I care a lot less about, when it comes to at least our perspective, about what the instructor's experience is. Like, while I want my tools to make it easy for you to do what you're supposed to do, at the same time, at the end of the day, I really care about what is the student's experience, because they're the ones who are supposed to be learning.
Amen.
So I care that it's going to be the best experience for them. So sometimes that means, instructors, you need to care more about technology so that you can actually know how it works and make sure that the experience for your students is as smooth as possible. Because I'm going to say this in a mean way and people are going to hate me, and because I'm sarcastic, I'm a little bitter tonight. So the way I'm going to say it is, it's not about you. I'm sorry, it's not about your, like, as much as your experience can be convoluted, and I'm annoyed at tools that make it hard for you, because it makes it hard for you to set it up and give you a good experience for the students. At the end of the day, I'm annoyed about all of that, because I want the student experience to be the best.
Yeah.
And so that's what you need to worry about as an instructor. It's like, okay, I need to know, if I'm going to use this technology, I need to commit to it. I need to know how it works. And then I need to make sure whatever I'm doing with it is the easiest process for the students, so this doesn't hold them back from learning.
Yeah.
And that's where I think how we make technology disappear in the background. Is that at the end of the day, you're the person responsible for this as well, as being the person teaching or designing the learning experience. And we'll try as hard to make it get in the background for you. And by we, I mean people like Will and I, and people who design courses and do the other end of this. Like, we try to make it as smooth as possible for you, but at the end of the day, we want the student's experience to be the best. And that's how we make that kind of fall back into the background.
An element of that, Josh, that's really, I think, important in the selection of tools and the maintenance of tools, like, hey folks, if that rubbed you a little hard, it's okay, because the truth does hurt sometimes. Over time, you, the instructor, will have multiplicative higher amounts of time spent in the tool than your students will. Your students will only ever spend a semester or maybe an academic year in the tool, while you should or may be using it year round and over 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth of teaching, right? So you're going to become an expert in it, and it might hurt or it might be difficult to get familiar with it on the front end, but once you've got it, if it's more difficult in the background, the most important thing is for those students. So it's going to be all right. Hang in there. YouTube has tons of stuff. I know tons of teachers who just make tutorials for their colleagues because they want to. They're not even trying to, like, monetize, right? I know a friend right now, he makes YouTube tutorials on almost any tool he uses because he knows how much harder it can be for folks who aren't as adept as he is to get to learn the tools. But then that's just like the better you can use it too. So here's another element to this make technology disappear. The more you know about it, the better you are at using it, the more likely it is to disappear for the students because you'll be using it effectively. And I know of some really good tools that are pretty straightforward on the front end, right? I think Nearpod comes to mind for the student experience. TopHack comes to mind for the student experience. If you set that up incorrectly, though, it's not going to be that great either.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't
Absolutely.
put the code out there for them to join, if you don't have a shareable link, if you don't tell them to put their names in, if you don't provide time limits, there's lots of things that can go wrong in setting something up that will make that experience worse for your students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, the amount of effort you go into making sure how you present things, you put it together, and how well you know how to use it is going to go a long way. I mean, like, let's use a practical example of Zoom, like the tool we all know, we know how to use, how to do this. Like, when the reality is, like, as much as we can bash Zoom and it's not perfect, and I definitely don't think we should be just running classes through Zoom, there is an advantage to the video conferencing that tool provides. And when you know how to use Zoom well, it does fall into the background a little bit. Like, you kind of forget that it's there. The reason so many people have problems with Zoom is because they, in my opinion, don't take the time to learn it well. And then it becomes, instead of just teaching, it becomes, well, where do I click to do this? Or how do I share my screen? I don't know why I'm so snippy and sarcastic tonight, but it's like, people, the share screen is a giant green button on your computer. It's not that hard. Like, it's there. Yeah. And it's because we haven't taken time. I understand people are busy. I understand, but we haven't taken time to sit down and just to learn it. And like to go in and know how to use it.
That's something as an instructional designer, instructional technologist, I've tried to do in the past with anybody who's going to use a tool I've offered for the first. I always try to get them to sit down with me first. Like, I don't run it with me. I will come into the classroom with you if that makes you feel more comfortable. I will go on Zoom with you if that makes, like, whatever it takes. Let's run it solo so you know what to expect. And that's going to make the experience all the better for the students, right? Because if you are ready for some of those questions because you ask them, that experience will become all the better. And we don't want to make this out to be like a myth, like a legend here, folks. Like, it's not impossible. I think that this is something that definitely comes with practice. Josh and I'll be honest, I can think of some apps we've promoted even through the podcast that like don't necessarily hit this right. They're not, it's not the best quality.
No tool does.
Right. But this isn't King Arthur and, his magical sword, right? We don't have to draw something out of the stone to make ourselves able to accomplish this, right? Excalibur, while a myth, it's not impossible. We can do this. We can do this so much so that we would even put forward an app that meets these qualities, so you've got something to reference. What is that app, Josh?
What is that app? I don't. It definitely doesn't have Excal in it. Because that transition just made so much sense without a tool. I'm just joking. Okay, so obviously, if you have listened to our show, you picked up on Will must be making a transition, because why the crap did he just start talking about King Arthur and Excalibur?
And why did Josh get really quiet?
Yeah, why did Josh just start silently laughing on the other side? The tool we have to suggest tonight. I think I picked this. I threw this out because it is a tool that I think does this concept well of making it as easy as possible. In this case, both for the instructor and the student. So we've suggested whiteboard tools before. We had an entire episode on it. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out, because all those other tools we talked about in that episode were also very good. But we didn't know about this one at the time that we were doing the episode.
There's always more.
And there's always more. And we found this. I found this through a coworker who had stumbled upon it and shared it with our team, and our team's been using it constantly. And right now, I would probably put this as the number one whiteboard tool that I would recommend to use in any kind of digital environment.
Whoa, right now. You heard it here first, folks.
You heard it here first. So it's called Excalidraw, and I will be completely honest with you, I hate the name. But it is a great tool. So the way that this tool works, it's a digital whiteboard tool. But unlike a lot of the other ones we suggested when we did our digital whiteboard tool, all what seems like an eternity ago, it's super easy to get into. This actually reminds me like of Math Whiteboard if it wasn't just for math.
Okay.
Like it doesn't do all the crazy stuff Math Whiteboard does, but you get into it in the same way Math Whiteboard did. You literally just go to excalidraw.com and it just immediately opens a whiteboard for you. And then from there you can draw on it, but you can also create shapes pretty easily. The advantage of this tool is, unlike like a Miro, which I love Miro. We suggested in our whiteboard tool. I still use Miro all the time. I think there's stuff that Miro does that is great for collaborative effort that Excalidraw does not. Like Miro will allow you to like bring groups together, gives you a lot of space to break people out if you're doing like virtual sessions, but it also is kind of, there's so much there that it can become overwhelming, cognitive overload. And so with Excalidraw, it's very simple. You've just a white background. You have only a couple options. You can do some arrows, some shapes. You can do some lines. You can draw, and anywhere you double click, you can add text. But the thing I also really like about Excalidraw is their whole thing is about making things literally look like it's drawn. So I can make a circle, and it looks like it was sketched. And so why this is super cool is I love using this to like sketch out diagrams for people really quickly, because it's super easy to put a diagram together and it doesn't feel super finished.
Yeah.
And there's just something about that that's helpful. We used it in a collaborative effort on Zoom with 12 different people.
Wow.
And it was a really simple activity. We were asking them to, in our case, we had a question, which was what are some traits of the average student? And we were doing this for like our design process, right? But you could do this in a class easily if you had like a question. And we had all the students. We just provided them a link, and that's a great thing about Excalidraw. I literally just send them the link. They click into it, no authentication needed. They literally just get in there, and then we had them type out their answers. And all we did was kind of draw out a box, and we had the question at the top of the box, and they went in and typed it in and added that stuff in there. We did a little cleanup. It was a little crazy at first, but I will tell you this. We had everybody from 18 to mid-50s using this in this session, and none of them had any problems getting in. They immediately jumped in and started typing stuff in. Now, granted, they work in our digital learning office, so we all kind of know tech pretty well, but I will point this. Some of my very lovable teammates who work in our editorial team do not all the time. And so they got in pretty easily. They're listening to this, which I don't think they are. But if they are, I apologize. But you know it's true. So they got in there, and it was pretty simple. It's cool. It's a really simple tool. And then the other thing I really like about it, it's completely free.
Yeah.
They have an Excalidraw Plus, but I'm going to be honest, I don't know how they're trying to make their money, because you don't need it. You literally just go in, you create your stuff, you can export out anything that you create, you can share it, start a collaborative session. It's just really, really easy, and all the stuff that you do in it is just there's no clunkiness. They know what they are. They're a whiteboard tool. They want it to be easy for everybody to access. It's browser based, so you don't need a specific device to use it.
Oof.
And you can use
You're checking a lot of the boxes, man.
Yes, so it's pretty simple. So if you listen to our first whiteboard episode and you were like, I don't know if I want to use those, because you guys suggested a lot, and we know that was early high tech podcast when we still were suggesting.
We've
a ton
learned
of tools
a
in one
thing.
episode. Come back to Excalidraw and check it out. Literally, again, we'll link to it in the page, but just go to excalidraw.com and you can literally start from there. And just get moving. It's really cool.
I really like the point of what Josh was saying on the aesthetic, that it takes what might be a perfect circle and makes it a little wonky, right? It's giving like some sketchy doodly vibes to it. It just feels a little more natural as you're looking at it. I know a lot of faculty came to me during the initial COVID-19 remote instruction time and said, I just need some things that are more normal, that feel real. You know, I had a lot of faculty ask me, like, how can I do anything with Zoom so that I don't have everything in like a black box? Is there any way I can do virtual reality? Like, really trying to stretch the options there. But to me, this is one of those things that's like so small and so simple that actually would bring that feeling of realism to your writing. And you know what? This, much like AutoDraw, is the perfect tool for someone like myself who can't draw a circle to save his life in the first place, right? Like these kinds of tools stand in the gap for those of us with minimal artistic ability or even just the ability to draw a straight line, which I do not have.
Yeah. Even the typing text that you do literally looks like you hand draw it.
Yeah.
Which is, again, like where I would use this is not like for amazing final products or things like that, but is like if you're in a virtual session over Zoom or whatever it may be. It's a great digital whiteboard. You can share your screen, send the link to your students. You all can kind of work on it, collaborate together on it, write up stuff. If you're creating a video where you want to draw out something or write out something, Excalidraw is a great way to do that. A great tool for that. Even if you want to bring it up on a screen in your classroom, you put the link in your online class site, whatever that may be, have them all click open it on their phones or on their computers and start throwing in ideas. This tool can help you do all of that, which is kind of cool. And it's just because there's no authentication barrier, there's no like login accounts, it removes all of the things that they need to learn. They literally don't need to learn anything. They need to know how to move a cursor or their finger on a phone,
right? And
they mostly all know how to do that. So if they know how to do that,
one would hope
they don't need to learn anything. It's that simple. And so I literally think you could take this tool, put it in a classroom, and all your students could pick it up within seconds.
I think
and that's why I think it fits well.
I think Josh showing that point really does demonstrate the make technology disappear, right? That the theory behind this isn't that we need to make it as easy as possible. It's not that it has to, but if they can pick it up and start playing with it and maybe not get it immediately, but they don't have a barrier that makes them want to turn it off altogether or close the window or put it down, right? If they can just try it, like, oh, if I click and drag, then this happens. That's different. Oh, cool. So if I double click this, oh, cool. You know, like it's easy to explore. There's no barrier to the functionality. You don't have to hold control to click or, you know, like those are the kinds of things that make it harder and make you aware of the technology at play. This is the kind of tool that if you're really trying to understand what we're saying today, folks, pop it open. Give it a shot. You'll probably have it figured out in 3 minutes yourselves, right? That's an example of how technology disappears.
Yeah, it's a real practical example of like, if I was going to use this as a practical example of like you literally just need your students to get on a board and collaborate and start writing down ideas and putting things in. Like you could go to a Miro, but you don't really need all the stuff that Miro does. And so I'd make the choice for Excalidraw, and that's a simple solution because I really just need people to put shapes and text down.
Right.
There's no reason they need to use Miro. While Miro is fantastic and does a lot of things, they don't necessarily need to use that. And where I see a lot of instructors trip up is where they'll make a decision to use like a Miro or a more complicated tool because that's the tool either they know or they're like, oh, but it can do all this stuff too. It's like, okay, but do you need your students to do that? You don't? Okay, then maybe this isn't the solution for you. Unless you institutionally use Miro for a lot of other things, then use Miro.
Right.
Because they already know how to use it. Don't give them another thing. But if that's the simple thing you need them to do, then bring them into the simple tool and don't worry about giving them a complicated tool.
Another great example of that, Josh, is if your institution's an Office 365 institution or a Microsoft 365 institution and you prefer Google Drive, don't assign them to use Google Drive. Know that they have to have Microsoft 365. Use it. It's available. They should be able. There's definitely some cases to be made in that example, but it's one of those things of like, if it's the available tool, okay. If everybody understands it already and there's no barrier to learning the tool, great. But when you can, reduce those barriers as much as possible. That's the high-tech way, frankly. Reduce barriers, make it as free or as cheap as possible, and hashtag don't be a sponsor. You've got us in the trifecta right there.
You got our podcast way.
This is the way.
That is our three-step this is a way model to the high-tech podcast. So anyway, again, go check it out, excalidraw.com. There is no swords involved and no round table, but it is a great tool. Although I guess you could draw a round table. That'd be a thing you could do. So anyway, go check it out. Excalidraw.com. It's a great tool. And be on the lookout for the next episode where we talk about part 2 of how to make technology disappear. In that episode, we're going to focus a little bit more on like some practical stuff. So we've talked about a lot of the theory. We've talked a lot about our opinions. I've been kind of a jerk. But this next episode, we're going to focus more on, okay, you have you're in some kind of teaching experience, you have an online course site that you use, whether you're in face-to-face class or you're not. What does it look like to actually then take what we've talked about and practically do it?
Yeah.
And trust me, we have a lot of strong opinions about that. So check that out on the next episode.
I don't know what he's talking
As
about.
we talk about it. Yeah,
There
I
are
don't know
no
what he's
strong
talking
opinions
about.
here.
We have zero strong opinions.
In the meantime, folks,
On that,
thank you very much. Go for it. We just did that.
no, we both just did that. It's fine. You do it. You end it.
Make sure to check us out at hightechpod.us. If you've got anything on the website, we want to make sure you've got the resources that are available there. Share those with your friends. We really appreciate it. We put some time into making sure that there's links, a little how-to, some ideas for you to like pick up one of these tools and start using it tomorrow. Follow us at High Tech Podcast on Twitter. Make sure to respond to our prompts for questions, share things around.
Give Will a nickname.
Until next time, we'll continue to work on harnessing technology, whether it's in the physical or digital classroom. See ya.
See ya.